to you.
Thank you, Mr. Grace. Are we okay to start?
That is correct, yes.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this very special session of Dulwich Inspires. It's a real privilege to have Mr. Richard Blair share with us today as a school for our Dulwich Inspires series, but also for the country of Myanmar and me personally. We're so lucky to have the son of an iconic British and internationally renowned writer who spent time in Burma. Personally, as I told the students when I joined Dulwich College Yangon, it was reading Animal Farm that got me interested in studying literature and ultimately becoming an English teacher. So the range of people we have with us in this meeting reflects the ongoing rich relevance of Orwell today, with people from NGOs, embassies, Ministry of Education, university, industry, staff, parents, and students from Dulwich College Yangon, but also Dulwich Shanghai and other schools in Yangon. Sorry that I don't have time to name you all individually, but we do wish you all a very warm welcome. Mr. Blair, you have a unique insight into someone we hold very dearly in our heads and our hearts about life, literature, social care, being resilient in tough times, and thinking outside the box. So thank you so much for taking the questions of our students and later taking questions from others that appear in the Zoom chat. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you indeed. I'm not quite sure whether to address you as David or whether I should address you as headmaster and distinguished guests. And of course, more importantly, the students of Dulwich College. Or we shall just keep this informal and say, good afternoon, David, and thank you very, very much indeed for your very warm welcome. And it gives me great pleasure, and I'm very humbled to be invited to come and talk to the students. And I look forward to talking to them and hopefully having a general discussion with them and anybody else who wishes to ask questions. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I know it's early in the morning here in England. It's quite cold, but nevertheless, I'm wide awake and I'm all yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Blair. Quite cold is not a concept that we're actually very used to here. I'm afraid if it gets down to 26 degrees, then we're running around with our hats on and our scarves. From the English Lakes District, I miss the cold, so I empathise with you with your cup of tea. As an English teacher of 25 years, I was trying to think of another sort of 20th century writer that has contributed so much to the Western literary canon. And there really isn't anybody, because although lots of writers have contributed fantastic books, your father's contribution of concepts and phrases is unparalleled. And I was thinking this morning of how many times have I heard the phrase Orwellian when listening to CNN's coverage of the current United States election. I think I'm not sure if you are, but if you are paid by the word Orwellian, then you're going to retire an extremely wealthy man after this Trumpian tantrum finally comes to its close. But no other author, I think, has actually contributed to our language in the way that your father has. So as an English teacher, much appreciation for that. Right, let's get on to the most important thing, which of course is the students asking you their questions. So we're going to start off with Alex of Year 9. Alex, over to you.
Your father spent 5 years in Burma. Have you ever been here, and did your father talk about his time here to you?
Thank you for your question, Alex. I'll answer your question, the second part first, and then I'll come back to the first part. No, my father never talked to me about being in Burma, for the simple reason, of course, I was only 5 years old when he died. So I probably wouldn't have appreciated what he was trying to tell me. So going back to the first part of your question, the answer is yes. My wife and I came out here in February of 2014, just as tourists. There was a small group of us, 25 of us, and we flew up Irrawaddy to pick up a ship, and we came slowly down the Irrawaddy. Took us about a fortnight. So stopping off here, there and everywhere. So yes, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was an interesting trip because I'm not quite sure how deeply I should go into this, but at the time it appeared to be, everything would seem to be quite relaxed from a political point of view. So we don't want to go into any great detail, but it seemed to be quite relaxed, and our guide was very good, and he was happy to tell us pretty much anything we were asking. Interestingly, one of the things that I discovered when we stopped at various places, there were a lot of young students who would come up to us and try and sell us copies of Burmese Days. These were interesting copies because every other chapter was back to front on very flimsy paper, and it was for $10, so it was quite expensive. I think I bought a copy, but I'm not sure what's happened to it. But the point about the fact that we could buy them was that apparently the Myanmar government were quite happy to allow Orwell to be sold in the country. They didn't see it as being a threat to their perceived regime. So yeah, whether things have changed or not, I couldn't say. We are hoping, we are hoping as the Orwell Society, we are hoping that we might be able to come to Burma with our members. It's something that would take quite a lot of time to sort out and organize. So at the moment, of course, we're unable to travel, so it's something for the future. And I sincerely hope that we will be able to come out as a group and go around some of the places that he was stationed at. So thank you for your question. I hope I've answered it correctly for you.
Thank you, that was fascinating. Can I just ask, did they know who you were when you were buying the copies of this book from the street traders? Did you not say, or did you restrain yourself?
No, I just I kept quiet. You see, one of my I suppose strengths is that not everybody realizes that Orwell's name was actually Blair. So being Richard Blair, I can actually hide in plain sight.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you use it when it's relevant, but that's
Yes.
admirably restrained.
I can use it as a blunt instrument if necessary.
Right, can we pass on now to Miki of Year 10? Are you with us, Miki?
Okay, I'll ask Miki's question, Mr. Blair, if that's okay. So
Yeah.
Miki's, sorry that she's not here. So Miki's question is, were you ever interested in your father's work as a child, or did your interest grow later when you were an adult? Thank you.
Yes, obviously the part of the answer, of course, goes back to the first question, is that I didn't realize who he was, excuse me, as a young age, up to the age when he died when I was 5 years old. It was much later when I was at school. Possibly, I came to my father, as it were, very slowly, year by year by year. And by the time I got to prep school, I think it was, I was 11 years old when I first read Animal Farm. I think I was encouraged to do so. And I was about 13 before I went on to 1984. So after that, of course, then I did read all through my teens and early 20s. I read everything that he'd, more or less read everything that he had written. So the answer is no, he didn't talk about it. So my interest did grow as time went on, obviously as my education advanced.
Thank you. Right, I think we're going to go back to Alex now. Alex is particularly keen and has a second question.
Yes.
Alex.
Do you also have a talent and passion for writing?
The silly answer is yes, I can read and write and count up to 10. That's not the answer you're looking for. I am, because I was an adopted child by George Orwell, therefore there is no DNA connection between myself and him. So I'm quite glad in many ways that I don't, if I was his son and didn't have his talent, I think that would be worse somehow. I would find that quite difficult. As I'm not his biological son, and I don't have his talent, which would be, you would have to be extraordinarily intelligent to have had his talent. It doesn't worry me that I can't I don't write. I write little articles from time to time for various magazines, and but no, the answer is I don't. I'm not a writer per se.
Right, well, we're going to ask Mr. Blair to do something very, very special for us now. This is what I've been looking forward to for weeks. Could you please, Mr. Blair, read for us the very last paragraph from your father's Animal Farm?
I will indeed. Here we go. There was the hearty cheering as before. The mugs were emptied to the dregs, but as the animals outside gazed at the scene, it seemed to them that some strange thing was happening. What was it that had altered in the faces of the pigs? Clover's old dim eyes flitted from one face to another. Some of them had 5 chins, some had 4, some had 3. But what was it that seemed to be melting and changing? Then, the applause having come to an end, the company took up their cards and continued the game that had been interrupted, and the animals crept silently away. But they had not gone 20 yards when they stopped short, as an uproar of voices were coming from the farmhouse. They rushed back and looked through the window again. Yes, a violent quarrel was in progress. There were shoutings, bangings on the table, sharp, suspicious glances, furious denials. The source of their trouble appeared to be that Napoleon and Mr. Pilkington had each paid an ace of spades simultaneously. 12 voices were shouting in anger, and they were all alike. No question now what had happened to the faces of the pigs. The creatures from the outside looking from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man again. Already it was impossible to say which was which.
Oh, the hairs on the back of my arms have gone up. Lovely, thank you ever so much. Right, could I pass on now to Theory of Year 9, Star City, are you with us?
Yes.
Excellent, your question please, Theory.
Hello.
In Animal Farm, Napoleon and the pigs win. Do you think your father would have been surprised that Russian communism lasted so long?
That's a very interesting question, because it's a question that's almost impossible to answer, in the sense that when my father died in 1950, I always used to say to some people, when someone dies, then all bets are off, in the sense that one has no real knowledge as to what he may or may not have thought afterwards. It's an impossibility. It's an impossible question to answer. However, I will do my best in the sense that one has to make assumptions. And do I think my father would have been surprised that the Russian communism lasted so long? Probably. The trouble is with some things like autocracies and communisms and those sort of governments, is that eventually things start to go wrong and it all starts to unravel. I suppose it was inevitable that the Russian type of communism did unravel, as it did in 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down. Would he have been surprised that it lasted so long? I really don't know. Probably not. I think he, on balance, it is probable that he would not have been surprised that it had lasted so long. So I hope that's a reasonable answer to you. It's the best I can give you, I'm afraid.
Thank you, and thank you, Terry. Right, passing on to Jessica of Year 9.
Do you prefer the cartoon film or the more recent one with the real animal?
Okay, Jessica. Nice to speak to you. I think the first film, of course, was obviously the cartoon version, which was made in 1954 by an English couple called Allison Batchelor. And they did an extraordinarily good job. This was quite a controversial film because it had apparently CIA finance behind it, because the Americans wanted to push the fact that this was talking about communism. In fact, of course, what my father was writing about was not necessarily communism per se. It was about governments controlling people, in the sense that the animals decided that they were trying to overthrow the common enemy and take on the world for themselves. And eventually it all comes crashing down. It all falls apart. So which one? There was another one that I saw. I've seen several stage plays, but there was another one which I can't remember, but it was made by a firm called Animatronics. There are, I don't know. I think probably the original one is as good as they're going to be. And that was the Harrison Batchelor one, which goes back to 1954.
Lovely, thank you. Chun Su of Year 8, are you with us?
Yes.
Thank you.
The pigs win in the book, but did your father have a more optimistic view about the human nature?
Oh, yes. Well, that's a lovely one, isn't it? I think that the general view of my father was that he was somewhat pessimistic, and none of his books as well never seemed to have an optimistic ending to them. That doesn't actually mean that he was pessimistic. He wasn't actually. He was very optimistic. He was very optimistic about looking when his wife died in 1945. Of looking after me and bringing me up. So optimism was in the background of my father. I think when he was writing, he was trying to write about the ideal, the realistic aspect of what would probably happen. I don't know. I think really it was Animal Farm is a very perfect book because it can be read for several levels. He was not the only one who wrote it, by the way. He had a lot of help from Eileen, his wife, who, when he was writing it, he would read out a chapter to her, and we generally feel that she offered some advice when he was writing it to perfect it. It's a very perfect book in the sense it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It can be read at all sorts of levels, and you can read into it what you wish. Did the pigs win in the book? Well, obviously, no. It was a political situation that just simply, or a situation that they created that simply didn't have enough foundation for it to last. And that's why in the end it collapsed, because commercialism and entered into the equation, and the whole edifice crumbled in the end. And as it says at the end of the book, when you look at from pig to man and man to pig, it became impossible to tell who was who.
Thank you. Right, this is a special treat now for our Year 11 students who have just started to read 1984. So if I could ask, please, you, Mr. Blair, if you would please read the opening paragraph of this classic dystopian novel.
Right, here goes. It was a bright cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Winston Smith, his chin nuzzled into his breast in an effort to escape the vile wind, slipped quickly through the glass doors of Victory Mansions, though not quickly enough to prevent a swirl of gritty dust from entering along with him. The hallway smelt of boiled cabbage and old rag mats. At one end, there was a coloured poster, too large for indoor display, had been tacked to the wall. It depicted simply an enormous face, more than a metre wide. The face of a man of about 45, with a heavy black moustache and ruggedly handsome features. Winston made for the stairs. It was no use trying the lift. Even at the best of times, it was seldom working, and at present the electric current was cut off during daylight hours. It was part of the economy drive in preparation for Hate Week. The flat was 7 flights up, and Winston, who was 39 and had a varicose ulcer above his right ankle, went slowly, resting several times on the way. On each landing, opposite the lift shaft, a poster with an enormous face gazed from the wall. It was one of those pictures which are so contrived that the eyes follow you about when you move. "Big Brother is watching you," the caption beneath it ran.
Thank you. Excellent, spine chilling, isn't it? Right, Simran, over to you.
What is your opinion on your father's 1984? How would you describe the story? And if you were given the chance to alter some parts of the novel, what would you change?
Oh, I'll answer the last part of your question first, if I may. What would I change? I wouldn't have the cheek to change anything. Not with my knowledge of writing. First part was, let me just double check. Make sure that I'm going to. How would I describe the story? What's my opinion? Well, it is an extraordinary book, which has, as he said when he wrote it, he said either it's going to take the world by storm or it's going to be completely ignored. That was his opinion of it when he wrote it in a letter to a friend. It's an extraordinary book. He did say at one point that it was a good idea, not very well executed. The simple reason was, of course, he was suffering from tuberculosis and had spent 7 or 8 months in hospital while he was writing it in 1947. It's a book that took him about 5 years to write, which is interesting in the sense that all his other books, he didn't take more than about a year to write before they were published. And it was an idea that was born back in the mid-1940s. It was published in 1949. But the whole essence of both Animal Farm and 1984 really goes back to his time when he was fighting in Spain in 1936, 1937, which was when he discovered what communism was really all about and how the communists were trying to manipulate the Spanish government and the Spanish the freedom fighters. And this was where he did, because in the end he was being hunted by the KGB, and this is where he discovered that the one thing he really hated was totalitarianism, and this is what he wrote about. Everything he wrote after the Spanish Civil War was against totalitarianism, and this was where the idea of both Animal Farm and, of course, 1984 arose. So what he wrote in Animal Farm, he then rammed home with the story of 1984. And it's not a prophecy, but it is simply a warning of what can happen if you allow authoritarian governments to overthrow, or not necessarily authoritarian governments, big companies like Amazon and Google and all these people who get such a grip on the world that they think they're omnipotent and can then dictate policy and so on and so forth. So what is my opinion of 1984? Well, of course, it has survived since 1949. So it's survived 70 years of publication. And interestingly, in 2016, when Donald Trump came to be president, and he talked about his inauguration photograph of hundreds of thousands of people that were photographed in Washington, and then it was proved conclusively that this was not so. It was suggested that this was an alternative truth. This was by Kellyanne Conway. And the result of that was that everybody went out and bought copies of 1984 to the point where Amazon sales went up by 6,000%. So that gives you some idea of how the manipulation of truth can alter, and this is one of the things that he warns us of, is the manipulation of truth. And that's really the story. It's a warning of what could happen if you allow things to continue, and that is, roughly speaking, what 1984 is about. So it's rather bleak, perhaps, but nevertheless, it's still read. People still enjoy reading it, and it gives them something to think about.
Thank you, thank you. We actually used that Kellyanne Conway quote in preparation for 1984 in year 11. Yeah, it's stunning, absolutely stunning. How she had the gall, I don't know. Cynthia, can I pass over to you, please? Cynthia of year 10.
So my question was, why did he write 1984?
Why did he write 1984? Okay, he wrote 1984, really to some extent it's the same sort of answer as the last one, in that he had this idea, because he'd been fighting in Spain and was wounded, he was shot through the neck, and eventually when he recovered, he realized that the communists were actually chasing him. They were going to arrest him and they'd probably have shot him. There's no question about it. He would have been executed in Spain. Excuse me. And this is why he had this thing against totalitarianism as being an evil way of governing people. So he had this idea, which was took root in Spain, and when he was working for the BBC during the 1940s, during the Second World War, he then had this idea, obviously, of starting with Animal Farm, and then going on and wrote 1984, because he set it in the sort of not the immediate future, but a sort of a future that was far enough ahead without making it total science fiction. And he just this was the genius of Orwell. He was able to think through how a system could work to the benefit of a government that wanted to control its people. And I have to say, there are a lot of things in there. The actual language he uses is perhaps a little bit old-fashioned today. He talks about telescreens and so on and so forth, which of course we don't use that word. But nevertheless, his principles of what he was writing still exist today. It's surveillance of people. And it happens all around us. In England, well, Great Britain, we have more cameras per head of population than anybody else in the world, which is rather ironic, really, considering that he was born in this country. Well, he wasn't born in this country, he lived in this country. So I hope that's, if you feel I haven't quite answered the question, you could always call me up and try and get me to say something else.
No, I think that has definitely answered the question.
Okay.
Sean of year 11, who is now on chapter 4 of 1984 in his studies. Sean, over to you.
So my question is, what do you think your father would have made of the current situation in America and President Trump's attitude towards facts and the truth?
Well, that's the principle, of course, of 1984 is everyone thought that he was having a go at Joe Stalin and communism. What he was subtly having a go at, of course, was not necessarily communism, but any authoritarian government. Even though America is a democracy, supposedly, Trump was trying to impose. Well, he was, in fact, surprisingly, he was democratic. A lot of people didn't like him just because of who he was. So what would my father have thought of Trump's attitude towards the facts and the truth? Trump just simply manipulated the truth and facts to suit his purpose. Because America was a democracy, it didn't actually make a huge amount of difference in the end, because the civil service background, that the machinery behind him probably didn't really pay a great lot of attention and just kept on going. That was the man. That was the idiosyncrasies of Trump, was that he just simply felt that he could say what he liked, when he liked, how he liked, and just irritated everybody to the nth degree. What would my father have made of him? I think he probably thought he was just an idiot. But I can only conjecture here. I'm not. I cannot speak for my father per se, since he's not here. he might be highly offended, although I suspect that he probably wouldn't be.
Thank you. Sarah Revere 10. Oh,
when he was is Sarah here?
Yes, Sarah is. I don't think she's unmuted those. Try again, Sarah. No, we can't hear her. Miss Cleves, could you read out Sarah's question, please?
I will, yes. Thank you. So this is Sarah's question. Your father was very ill when he was writing 1984. What advice would Orwell give us today about how to be resilient in tough COVID times and lockdown? Thank you.
That's a toughie, isn't it? I'm not quite sure. Yes, he was. My father was a very stoical man. Of course, he knew for a long time that he was not very well, because he had TB and had been into a sanatorium in 1938. Excuse me. And so obviously during the war, he was difficult circumstances. Both he and his wife worked very hard. She became very ill and she died in 1945. That was Eileen, his first wife, and he was left with me. It was then that he decided in 1946 that he would actually leave London, because by this time he had got 1984 in his mind. He'd been writing notes and had started to write. So he decided to clear out of London and forego all further journalisms and article writings and answering people's letters, and disappear up to the west coast of Scotland, which would give him peace and quiet. And that's where of course I followed him. So he and I were together for from 1946 to 1950. So what would be the advice about COVID and lockdown? I think most of us would have probably survived not too badly. His advice would be, well, of course, he wrote all the time. He wrote every day, morning and afternoon. So from that point of view, it probably wouldn't have made a lot of difference. It would have probably passed him by, and he would just simply carried on writing. So it was all right. Would have been all right for him. What would be his advice? Hard to say. Pretty much, get your head down and just try and get through it as best you can.
Thank you. Yes, we will, and we are. Julia, please, your question.
How can we effectively share Orwell's stories with younger children?
How can we effectively share Orwell's stories? Well, of course, I suppose really the first book you need to read as far as Orwell's is, of course, Animal Farm, because it is, in fact, a fairy story that can be read at various levels. You could probably, if a really bright child would be quite happy to read it at the age of 6, 7, 8, possibly, and but not necessarily understand the full impact, although they would probably have got some sort of idea of the story. My father didn't really write for children as such, but I think once you had advanced on into teenage years, then that would be the where you would start. Of course, the problem is, well, it's not a problem, most people only recognize Orwell for 2 books, Animal Farm and 1984. In fact, his output was enormous. He wrote so many other things, apart from of his books, of which I think probably the ones that I like best are his factual ones, Down and Out in Paris and London, Homage to Catalonia, The Road to Wigan Pier. His novels are easily read. A lot of people don't think don't have a strong storyline to them. He did have to rewrite some of them a little bit because of libelous action. I think probably once you have got read, say, 1984, An Animal Farm, then you want to go into some of the other things, that some of the essays, some of the brilliant essays, and two of them, of course, refer to his time in Burma. If I may call it Burma, I'm not quite sure whether I'm being PC or not here. Is, of course, two stories. One is called Shooting an Elephant, and the other one is called A Hanging. These are very, very powerful essays, and he was an extremely good essayist. If you read any of his books, you will find passages in all of them somewhere that you can actually extract as a whole without taking away from the novel itself. Extract passages which stand up alone as essays, and you will find that in Down and Out in Paris and London. One of his famous essays was called How the Poor Die in Paris. He writes a wonderful descriptive piece about life for the tramps in the poor houses that they would inhabit at night time. And everywhere you will find bits that you can extract, take out, and read on their own, and they will stand alone. So from that point of view, I think once you're into your teenage years, there are so many things that you could read. His journalisms are wonderful. The stories he tells simply are, he had such a diverse range of things that he wanted to talk about. I mean, things like to a frog. He talks about frogs in the springtime. Extraordinary descriptive. He had a great sense of nature, even as a little boy. He loved nature. He was very authoritative on birds and plants. He knew an awful lot about them, and was very fond of animals. He kept animals as a young man when he was first married, when he lived in a little village in England called Wallington. And so he always had a feeling for nature. I'm sort of rambling on here, so where are we going with this? How would children effectively share Orwell stories? I think once you've grown into your teenage years, then, and you've taken a liking to Orwell, then these are the things that you should read. The essays, they're wonderful. I have copies of them here, two of them, in fact, of his, which you can get. You could probably find them on Amazon. And I think that's where you advance your reading further into Orwell, because then you will find out who the man really was.
Lovely, thank you. I think we've got some orders for the library there, Mrs. Clear, I'm afraid. Right, Justin, can we have your question, please?
Hi, Mr. Blair.
Hello.
My question is, what are you most proud of looking at your father's work and legacy? Thank you.
Well, I suppose that the short answer to your question, Justin, is that I'm just profoundly proud of my father. He was one of these people who didn't, when he started writing, he didn't write very well to begin with, and he wrote and wrote, and he threw away huge amounts of work which he didn't like, because he was a perfectionist. He was a wordsmith, and he just simply wanted to, what he wrote, he wanted to make sure it was as good as he could make it. He wanted to, what he said was, he wanted to make political writing into an art form, and that's one of his quotations, which we quite often use within the Orwell Foundation. In fact, it's a catchphrase that we use. And I'm just, of course, profoundly proud of what he did, because he stands out. A lot of people criticize Orwell for all sorts of things. Well, you're entitled to your opinion, of course. So if you have a cogent argument against him, I'm happy to hear it, and we'll listen to it and answer the question if you think Orwell was an idiot, or whatever you might think of him. But most people, I think, probably see Orwell for what he was, as somebody who had a great deal of intelligent things to say about life. And what he said was, make people step back and think, yes, that there is something in this man that resonates even today, which he has been read for 70 years without a stop. In fact, within each decade, he becomes more and more read by more and more people. Unfortunately, his copyright runs out as within 2 months, the end of this year. So he becomes a free-for-all.
Interesting.
But yes, no, I'm immensely proud of what he did. And gosh, if I could write half of what he did, I would be a happy man.
Thank you. Albert, over to you, Albert, year 9.
Yeah, if you could ask Orwell one thing today, what would it be?
Why did you die so young? That's the short answer. And again, it's a bit silly, but not silly at all, actually. But you know, I could just leave it at that. But you're entitled to a bit more than that. What would I ask Orwell one thing today? Would it be? I would have liked to have seen him had he lived longer. And he did say that he had another about 4 books in him had he survived his TB problem in 1949. I've often fantasized about him. I think he could probably have, because he was very fond of children, by the way. You might not think it, but he was. He was deeply fond of me. Then I'd like to have thought that he could have written a series of children's books. I think he was probably quite capable, had he got a little bit older, that he could have sat down and written a series of children's books. That's the sort of fantasy that I have, because I think it would have been very successful. He just had the intelligence and the foresight and just his depth of knowledge that he could have probably have done that and would have been very successful. But apart from that, he did have, and he had started writing some very long essays before it became too late. So, yeah, I guess you died too soon.
Thank you. Great question, Albert. Thank you. Right, Amara, over to you.
What is your key advice to someone thinking about becoming a writing teacher?
I've often asked myself that when I've been writing articles. What am I doing? What advice would I give you? Crikey. I suppose. Well, first of all, you have to know what you're going to be writing about. What are the practical advices? I don't know. You make notes, I suppose, and you try and map out what it is that you're trying to say, and then try and get it. I don't know what you would have to go to somebody who understands the rules of writing, which is something that I have never studied, I'm afraid. It's a question that I would struggle to answer with any degree of intelligence, I'm afraid. I guess it's something that's in it. My father knew that he was going to write, even when he left school. And when he went to Burma for the 5 years that he was a policeman. But he knew when he left that what he wanted to do was to be a writer. And that's what he wasted a lot of time practicing it in the late 1920s, early 30s. His parents were exasperated by him when he lived in a place called Southwold in the east of England, in Suffolk, and because his father was, despaired of him doing anything, because he would just sit and write and throw what he wrote away because he didn't like it, and just generally was a pain in the neck. And then, of course, he went away and did all his various things, his various trampings, and gained experience. And his writing, he just perfected as time went on. I think the apex of his perfection is probably Animal Farm, because 1984 was a very complex subject that he was writing about. And he did say to somebody, I think I mentioned this earlier on, that it was a good idea, not very well executed, or it could have been executed better. So I'm sorry, I'm afraid it's something, it's something innate within you if you want to be a writer, I think. You either are or you aren't. To just simply to be able to sit down and freeload your mind onto paper.
Thank you. Penultimate question now. Salila, over to you.
Which book by your father is your personal favorite and why?
My personal favorite is Animal Farm as a book. But nevertheless, as I said earlier on, there is so much more to my father than just Animal Farm in 1984. And you really must, if you have a pleasure in reading my farm and want to advance it, then go back and read his books. And then you can then go on and read all his essays and in whatever order you wish, or his various political writings, but certainly start with Animal Farm as a starting point, and take it on from there. And if you like what you read, then Orwell you can read everything that was ever written, that he ever wrote, and I would hope you would enjoy it, because I think it would teach you a lot.
Thank you. And last but not least, and I can almost hear your voice going, Mr. Blair, I think that second cup of tea is definitely going to be deserved. I'm going to pass you over now to Thomas.
Hello, hope you're doing well.
Hi, Thomas.
My question is, what would your father have made of the world post-1984?
Well, I suppose one could say, well, I told you so. Which again is one of sort of short, silly answers. But I can't help feeling that he probably would have thought, well, you know, this is what I not predicted. This, because what he wrote in 1984 was just simply something that was a warning that if you allow people to get away with trying to control other people, then this is what you could end up with. And I guess he probably, you know, does the story fit the history, or does history fit the story? It's an interesting conundrum, isn't it? I don't think history fits the story somehow. That would be too absurd. But we seem to have gone on in many ways, in the sense that what he wrote about has, in many ways, come to pass. Television, of course, CCTV, surveillance, and surveillance by governments. So it would probably, you would probably say it's pretty much what we've got. And this is what I said.
Thank you. Right, we're going to give Mr. Blair a very well-earned 10-20-second rest now, where you can have a swig of tea. If anyone in the audience, anyone from the floor, feels that they would like to ask a last couple of questions, we can only choose one or two, obviously, because of time restrictions. But if you'd like to put it into the chat function of your Zoom screen, and then Ms. Cleves is going to have a lightning look through those questions that you might really wish to ask and might never have the opportunity again. It's such an honour for us to have Mr. Blair here, obviously, at DCY. But if Ms. Cleves, if you could let us know if there are any questions coming up that look like might be a very good way to end this afternoon's session.
I have one.
Oh, Matthew, thank you. Can you mute your microphone, Matthew? Thank you, because I'm just looking at the questions. Thank you. Well done. There is a question from Dylan from Star City Year 7. Have you taken any inspiration from your father?
I think the inspiration one should take from, excuse me, from my father is be honest to yourself. He was an honest man. He never wrote, you know, although he described himself as a journalist, or that was in his passport, Anything he wrote, he tried to write as honestly as possible. If you ever get round to reading Homage to Catalonia, the first thing he says, this is when he fought in the Spanish Civil War, 1936, 1937. The first thing he says in Homage is that what I'm writing about is I try and put down as I saw it as honestly as possible. He did have a problem, of course, is that all his notes, photographs and diaries had been stolen by the KGB. So he was having to write from memory when he wrote Homage to Catalonia. So he tried to write it as best he could remember. But that was the one thing, because the problem was he was seeing articles coming from England that bore no relation to what was going on in Spain. They were talking about battles that never existed, battles that were fought in Spain that was never reported. So there was a lot of misinformation coming out of England, never mind where else it might be coming from. So that was his, I think that's really what one should try and bear in mind, is if you're going to write about something, try and write about it as honestly as possible.
Thank you. You have one more question. I have one more.
It's so hard. I've got 15 questions here. Can
I point one out for Jack Temple is joining us from Shanghai. So welcome, Jack. And he's asked a question which I think is fantastic. You know, as the son of obviously a great man, do you feel any pressure from that legacy, or have you felt that it's enriched your life? Or is the pressure perhaps a difficult one to bear as the son of a man?
Well, I'm 76 and I'm still here, and the pressure hasn't got to me yet. So there's a fair chance I'll make it to the end without collapsing. I have to try and describe myself, I suppose, really in 7 words, 6 words, as just being the ordinary son of an extraordinary father.
I don't know whether we have to agree with that or not, Ms. Cleves. I don't think you're ordinary at all. Can I pass on? Thank you ever so much to everyone who's contributed. Thank you very much to Mr. Blair for your tireless efforts for talking for nearly an hour now. Can I pass us back to Mr. Messier, please? I'm out of words myself.
Can you still hear me?
Waiting for Mr. Massier to unmute his mic.
Okay, well, may I thank all the students for their questions. Some of them were quite intense and are really quite difficult to answer for all sorts of reasons. But that doesn't necessarily mean they didn't ask the right question. But that was well done to them, and I hope they continue to read Orwell.
Thank you very much. Mr. Grace, can I be heard?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Blair, thank you so much for sharing those personal insights, your humility, those fascinating comments about modern manipulation, resilience, very encouraging words of current times, and your personal experience of your father's optimism in your personal life. This really will be a special memory for all of us, not just the English teachers amongst us. And it's a special memory that we will cherish for many years. The moment that we were touched by the family of an icon who shaped, as Mrs. Jeffrey said, who shaped the world, our role as active citizens, and even becoming a teacher. So yeah, here we are in COVID lockdown. The funny thing is that these Dulwich series, this Dulwich Inspired session with Mr. Blair probably would not have happened if it was not for COVID. So thank you for helping us turn this challenging time into a positive. And finally, yeah, thank you to the English department. Mrs. Jeffries, a big shout out to you for all the work you've done with Mrs. Cleves with helping get this organized, and our counsellor, Ms. Hinojosa, for all the sessions you've been organizing and the emails going back and forth with Mr. Blair, and our wonderful parent, Mrs. Rena Crick. I have seen you amongst all the 200 people we've had here today, Mrs. Rena Crick, and I'd just like to give a very special shout out to you as a parent and to the rest of our parent body for helping organize such special moments. And to you all, from Shanghai to here to England and elsewhere, thank you for being with us. And I hope that we can continue to inspire each other because of this talk. And as Richard, as Mr. Blair tells us, we all have many more books and much more of Orwell's literature to read during this COVID lockdown and beyond. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Blair.
Thank you very much, David, for those words. And thank you very much indeed for allowing me into Dulwich College. I'm only sorry that I couldn't be there personally, because that would have given me even more pleasure. But in the circumstances, I think we've done an extraordinary, or you, the school, have done an extraordinarily good job in putting this together. And I thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. And one day, I hope that we, as the Orwell Society, will get a chance to come to Burma and see the places that he was stationed in. And that would give me even greater pleasure.
We look forward to having you here. That would be a wonderful treat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I will say farewell to all those people who have spoken to me. Take care and good luck.